"Your kids can eat at home," my mom snapped, flinging napkins at them as my sister's daughter's unwrapped $65 fancy takeout with dessert. Her husband smirked, "Should have fed them earlier." I leaned in and said, loud and clear. When the waiter came back, I rose and said, "Can you imagine sitting at a family dinner, hoping for a moment of peace, only to have your own mother, without a flicker of remorse, tell your daughters they're not good enough for Disneyland? But their cousins, oh, they already had tickets." That night, something in me snapped, and I realized I was done playing along. But to truly understand what happened that night, how my two beautiful girls, Chloe, who's 10, and sweet little Lily, ended up learning such a painful lesson, we need to go back a bit. You see, in my family, there's always been an A-list, and everyone else. And everyone else? They were just expected to clap quietly from the sidelines. My name is Ethan, and for as long as I can breathe, I've felt like I've been walking on eggshells around them. I'm 36 now, and honestly, the only truly good thing to ever come out of this whole mess is my incredible wife, Sarah. She's the one who should have run for the hills when she caught a glimpse of the absolute chaos she was marrying into. But she stuck around. Mostly for me, I think. And sometimes, if I'm honest, for the sheer spectacle of it all. Because my family isn't just dramatic, it's a slow-motion train wreck where the engine swears it's never derailed, even while the caboose is, quite literally, engulfed in flames. Take my sister, Melanie. She's 38, 2 years older, and has been the undisputed princess of our family since the day she was born. If little Melanie spilled her juice as a kid, it wasn't her fault, oh no. It was Ethan. What did you do to distract your sister? If she forgot her homework, it was Ethan. Why didn't you remind her? And God forbid I ever wanted anything she already had. She didn't just get the bigger slice of cake. She got the entire cake stand, with a bow on top. Of course, she married David, one of those guys who just looks like he owns a yacht, even if he doesn't. They live in a sprawling house in the suburbs, with a designer dog that gets Christmas presents from my parents. Meanwhile, my girls? Chloe and Lily? They're still waiting for a single birthday card from their grandparents. Not that I ever expected anything different. Honestly, Hope packed its bags and left the building years ago. And then there's my mom, Eleanor. She could win an Olympic medal in selective generosity. Lavish brunches for Melanie's kids. Expensive day camps. Just because packages showing up at their door. She'd bragged to her church group about how perfectly Melanie was raising those girls. But for my daughters, it was always, "You should learn to budget better, Ethan." As if budgeting would magically conjure grandparents who remembered birthdays. That fateful dinner wasn't just some random bad luck. It was the crushing culmination of years, decades, of small humiliations, tight-lipped smiles, and countless moments where I just let things slide, all for the sake of keeping the peace. I used to truly believe that being the bigger person meant staying quiet. But the bitter truth is, the more you swallow your pride, the more it starts to taste like poison. My mom had invited us out under the pretense of a family catch-up. She picked this ridiculously trendy fusion place, you know the kind, with waiters in leather-strapped aprons and water that comes in tiny glass bottles blessed by mountain nymphs. She swore it was her treat. And that, frankly, was the only reason we said yes. Sarah was skeptical, naturally. "You really think this is a good idea?" she asked as we got ready. I tried to sound convincing, even to myself. Maybe she's trying. Sarah just gave me that look. "Trying what?" she countered, "to keep up the streak of making your daughters feel invisible?" I had no good answer. My heart just ached for one decent, peaceful dinner where my girls didn't feel like they were wearing clearance rack clothes at a black tie event. We showed up 5 minutes early, Sarah making sure the girls looked impeccable. Lily had a sweet little bow in her braid, and Chloe wore her white dress, the one she saved for special occasions. My mom and Melanie's family strolled in 10 minutes late, laughing about some TikTok I wasn't privy to. Melanie air-kissed me, then immediately turned to Sarah. "Love your top," she chirped, with a smile that was 2 parts Botox and 1 part pure, unadulterated judgment. David, her husband, ordered wine before the waiter even introduced himself. Melanie immediately launched into their summer plans. Some exclusive camp in Vermont, then a week in Italy. I just nodded along, spooning water into Lily's glass from one of those tiny, mystical bottles, feeling like I was performing some sacred ritual. And then, the food talk. My mom leaned in toward the waiter, her eyes flicking pointedly toward Melanie's girls. "Oh, we've pre-ordered for them," she said, a proud little smirk playing on her lips. "The chef knows their favorites." I glanced at my daughters. They were quietly flipping through the kids' menu, circling things with their fingers, still full of innocent hope. "Mom," I started, my voice carefully low, "you didn't order for Chloe and Lily." She blinked at me, genuinely confused. "Well, I assumed you'd bring snacks or something. They're kids. They don't need a fancy meal." "That's silly." I looked at Sarah. Her jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching. "They just came from practice," I stated, my voice a little colder now. "They're hungry." "Oh, I'm sure they'll survive," my mom said, laughing lightly as she flicked her cloth napkin onto her lap. "Besides, they can eat when they get home." And that's when she tossed the napkins. Not cloth ones. Paper ones. Too thin, crumpled squares she'd pulled from her purse, like she was throwing table scraps to dogs. My stomach dropped. I felt Lily's tiny hand wrap around mine, confused and so vulnerable. Then David, Melanie's husband, laughed. "Should have fed them first," he chuckled, as if it were some cosmic joke that I hadn't properly prepped my kids for a dinner they were invited to. I leaned toward my girls, squeezed their hands, and whispered just loud enough for Sarah to hear, too. "Copy that." The waiter came back, notepad in hand, ready for orders. I stood up. He looked up surprised. "Everything all right, sir?" I nodded politely. "Would you mind giving us a moment?" He retreated, sensing the tension. I stayed standing, my mind racing. Was I going to make a scene? Or just walk out? Chloe was still holding her menu, completely uncertain. Lily was whispering to Sarah, who was barely holding it together, her eyes steely. "Ethan, sit down." My mom sighed dramatically, as if I was embarrassing her. Melanie was already scrolling on her phone board. Her girls, meanwhile, were feeding each other truffle mac and cheese out of designer-to-go boxes. And that's when it hit me. Those meals were boxed. My mom hadn't just forgotten. She had planned this. She knew. I slowly sat, but not because she told me to. I wasn't backing down. I just needed a better angle. The moment passed. Everyone placed orders. Melanie's family ordered like regulars. Sarah and I, with heavy hearts, let the girls pick the only two things under $20. A margarita flatbread and fries. We didn't want a scene. Not yet. I needed to gather my thoughts, to see if I was overreacting or if this was as twisted as it felt. Turns out, I wasn't overreacting. If anything, I was late. The meal went downhill faster than I expected. My mom spent the entire appetizer round grilling Melanie's daughters about their accomplishments. One had just done a piano recital. My mom pulled out her phone to show everyone a video. It played loudly, echoing across the restaurant while Melanie beamed. My daughters leaned in, curious. My mom didn't show them. She just turned the phone back to herself when the song ended. "She's gifted," she declared. "Not every child has that." I opened my mouth, but Sarah's hand, firm and steady, tapped mine. "Later," she whispered. Then the discussion turned to school awards. Melanie's youngest won a reading competition. "That's great, that's wonderful," I said quietly, casually. But Chloe was just named Student of the Month at her school for kindness. I knew my mom had seen the picture I sent. She didn't even blink. "That's nice," she said, sipping her wine, then turned to David. "Did you see the TikTok I sent you of the dog that barks the alphabet?" Sarah squeezed my hand under the table. It was that or break her wine glass. I looked at Chloe. Her face fell just slightly. That slow, heartbreaking drop of someone realizing they aren't interesting enough to be celebrated. I knew that look. I'd worn it myself for most of my childhood. The entrees arrived. The food was good, but I'd lost my appetite. The waiter set the girls' plates down, flatbread and fries, and I saw the way he glanced at the boxed meals in front of Melanie's daughters. He was putting it together, too. Midway through the meal, my mom leaned toward Melanie. "Should we tell them?" she asked with a sly smile. I set down my fork. "Tell us what?" Melanie beamed, practically radiating smugness. We're taking the girls to Disneyland this fall. Surprise trip. Just the four of us. My stomach flipped. Sarah straightened in her seat, every muscle suddenly rigid. You're taking your girls? She asked slowly, her voice laced with disbelief. Melanie shrugged like it was no big deal. Yeah, Mom and I planned it last week. Flights are already booked. I looked at my mom. She was already nodding. I figured it would be too expensive for you guys, she said, not unkindly, just matter of fact. And with your work schedule and everything else. I stared at her, utterly gutted. You planned a family vacation and didn't even tell us? It's not a family vacation, she said with a small, dismissive laugh. It's a treat for the girls. Our girls are your granddaughters, too. Sarah said, her voice suddenly ice, sharp enough to cut. They love Disneyland. I'm sure they'll get to go someday, my mom said, waving her hand like it was a minor inconvenience. It's not a big deal. Chloe looked down at her lap, her little shoulders slumping. Lily blinked rapidly, trying so hard not to cry. I felt something hot and twisted inside me. Shame, burning rage, profound regret for ever thinking tonight could be different. Melanie leaned in, clearly relishing every agonizing second. I'm sure we'll take lots of pictures. We'll send them to you. And that's when I snapped. I stood up again. Sarah didn't stop me this time. I need a minute, I said, my voice dangerously even. I walked outside, hands shaking. It was a warm night, but I was freezing. Not from the weather, just that hollow, chilling cold that settles deep into your chest when you realize something for the very last time. Because that's what was happening. I wasn't shocked by the favoritism. I wasn't even surprised by the cruelty. What hit me hardest was the fact that I had seen it coming and still walked right into it. Still let my girls believe they were going to be part of something they were never truly invited to. And the worst part? It wasn't even new. It was a rerun of my entire life. I remembered birthdays growing up where Melanie would get the full parade, balloons, banners, cakes from specialty bakeries, and I'd get a card signed Love Mom with a crumpled $10 bill and no cake. I remembered parent-teacher nights where my mom gushed over Melanie's C in math while completely ignoring my science trophies. I remembered being told, boys don't need that much attention and don't be jealous. Be helpful. I thought it would be different with my girls. I thought becoming a father would finally give me some leverage, some way to rewrite the script. But you can't rewrite a story if the author never changes. I stayed outside for a long, cold minute. Then Sarah joined me, her arms crossed, jaw tight. You okay? She asked softly. I shook my head. No, but I know what to do. She raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? I didn't answer. Not yet. Because revenge, when it's truly deserved, doesn't come in one explosive moment. It simmers. It builds. And I had just found my spark. I walked back in. Melanie was laughing at something David said, her head thrown back. My mom was swirling her wine like she was the queen of a table that existed solely to orbit her. My daughters were sitting quietly side by side, eating their flatbread like it was some kind of test they had to pass without speaking. And I watched them, those two sweet, patient girls, and I made a silent, unbreakable promise. This wouldn't happen again. Ever. I sat down slowly. My mom glanced at me, still sipping her wine. You all right, dear? I smiled. A tight, unreadable smile. More than all right. And that's when the waiter returned to ask about dessert. And that's when I said something that would turn the entire night upside down. The waiter hovered near our table, still waiting for dessert orders. Melanie's kids were practically bouncing in their seats, loudly requesting the chocolate dome with the caramel explosion, like they'd rehearsed the moment. My mom leaned in again with that signature smirk that always accompanied her worst behavior, like she was starring in a sitcom only she found funny. I didn't break eye contact with her when I said, actually, we're going to hold off on dessert. The waiter nodded, glanced at my mom, who waved him away like a servant in an old movie. She didn't even bother to hide it anymore. Suit yourself, she said, dismissing us. But don't be surprised when the girls regret missing the best part. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I was too focused on what was coming because I could feel it. This wasn't just going to be another dinner where I swallowed my frustration and paid for it in silence later. No, this was the night the thread finally snapped. It started with a toast. Melanie tapped her glass with a fork, just a soft ting, 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 then stood up with all the flourish of someone who thought she was the most interesting person in every room. I just want to say, she began, her voice dripping with saccharine sincerity, that I'm so grateful we could all be here tonight. It's not every day we all get to sit down as a family and celebrate how far we've come. David placed his hand on her back with all the supportive husband energy of a man who never had to work for his approval. Melanie beamed. Mom, thank you for putting this together, for always being there for us, for supporting our girls in everything they do, for going above and beyond. Whether it's weekend sleepovers, surprise gifts, or those late-night calls when I'm losing my mind with homework chaos. My mom wiped a fake tear with a cloth napkin. Of course, sweetheart. That's what family's for. There it was. The moment. The exclusion. Dressed as affection. A toast to everyone except us. I could see Sarah's nostrils flare. I could hear Chloe slowly stop chewing, like even her 10-year-old heart understood she'd just been passed over again. Then Melanie raised her glass. To strong women raising strong daughters. They all clinked glasses. I didn't move. Neither did Sarah. And for a moment, there was a silence so sharp it could have split the table in two. You know, I said finally, my voice cutting through the quiet, it's wild how often we all get together and still manage to feel like strangers. Melanie blinked, her perfect smile faltering. What's that supposed to mean? I didn't answer her. I looked at my mom. Mom, when's the last time you came to one of Chloe's soccer games? She shifted in her chair. Well, you know how busy I am. But you made it to 2 of Ava's piano recitals and 1 of Charlotte's ballet rehearsals. Not even a performance. A rehearsal. I didn't realize you were keeping score, she said coolly, a defensive edge in her tone. I wasn't, I replied, my gaze unwavering. But it turns out my daughters were. Chloe looked up at me, confused, as if she couldn't quite believe I was actually saying it out loud. Sarah reached for her hand under the table, a silent comfort. Melanie rolled her eyes. Here we go. No, I said, locking eyes with her. You don't get to dismiss this like it's some petty thing. You've always acted like this, like your kids are the center of gravity, and the rest of us are just satellites orbiting their perfect little lives. I'm sorry you feel that way, she said in that condescending therapist voice people use when they don't want to apologize. That's not an apology, Sarah muttered, her voice low and dangerous. And then David, Melanie's husband, chimed in. Maybe if you put as much effort into your parenting as you do keeping score, you wouldn't feel so left out. I froze. It wasn't just the words. It was the smirk he delivered them with, like he thought he just dropped the mic, like he expected everyone to nod in agreement. Even my mom didn't stop him. Chloe looked crushed, her small world collapsing around her. Lily was hiding her face in Sarah's arm, trembling. That's when I realized it wasn't just favoritism. It was sabotage. Because this wasn't about treating my girls differently out of negligence. It was intentional. Cruel. Targeted. It was the moment I finally understood. They didn't just overlook us. They enjoyed watching us be small. So, I stood up again. I pulled out my wallet, took out 2 crisp $100 bills, and placed them deliberately on the table. That should cover our part, I said. You don't have to do that, my mom said, her tone suddenly saccharine. This was supposed to be my treat. I ignored her and leaned down to my girls. Come on, let's go. Chloe looked up, her eyes wide with fear. Are we in trouble? No, sweetie, Sarah said, already grabbing her purse. We're just done playing pretend. As we gathered our things, Melanie scoffed. You're seriously going to make a scene? I turned to her, my gaze cold. No scene. Just finally acknowledging what's been obvious for years. Then I paused, because I wasn't done. I turned back to my mom. You had a choice, you know. You could have loved all your grandkids. You could have shown up, supported them, made them feel like they belonged. Instead, you chose a favorite. And the worst part is you taught them that love is conditional. Her eyes narrowed, her face hardening. You're being dramatic. I'm being honest, I said, meeting her stare head-on. And for once, I'm okay with you not liking what you hear. We walked out before anyone could reply. The restaurant door shut behind us with a soft click, but the sound echoed in my chest like a cannon. Outside, the girls were quiet, huddled close to Sarah and me. "Where are we going?" Chloe asked tentatively. I knelt down and looked her in the eyes. "Anywhere you want." They chose ice cream. Of course they did, because they're still kids, still sweet, still hopeful, even after being let down again and again. We sat on a bench outside the ice cream shop, their cones melting faster than they could eat them. Sarah rested her head on my shoulder. "You did the right thing," she said softly. I didn't respond. Even though I'd finally stood up for them, I still felt like I'd lost something. That illusion that maybe, somehow, my family would change, that maybe they'd finally see us. And yet, there was a calm in my chest now. A strange, unfamiliar peace. Because when someone shows you who they are, really shows you, you can finally stop pretending. And that clarity? That was the beginning of something new. But I didn't know yet just how much worse things were going to get, because 3 days later, I got a phone call that changed everything. 3 days. That's how long the silence lasted. Just long enough for me to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, my exit had sunk in. That maybe my mom would call. Maybe Melanie would feel a sliver of guilt. Maybe someone, anyone, would try to fix what they'd broken. But no. 3 days of nothing. No texts, no calls, no emails. No, "Oh, are the girls okay?" No, "Can we talk?" And then the phone rang. I was at work, buried in invoices, when I saw the caller ID. Aunt Brenda. Not my mom. Not Melanie. Aunt Brenda. I hadn't talked to her in months, maybe a year. But the moment I picked up, I could tell she already knew something had gone down. "Ethan," she said, her voice tight with disapproval. "Did you really walk out of your mother's dinner and cause a scene?" I took a slow breath, trying to calm the anger already bubbling up. "Hi, Aunt Brenda. Nice to hear from you, too." She didn't laugh. "Eleanor is beside herself. Melanie said you stormed out, made a dramatic speech about being mistreated, and left them with a huge bill." I rubbed my forehead, already feeling the exhaustion settle in. "I paid our share, Aunt Brenda. I left $200. Sarah and I took the girls out for ice cream." "That's not what your mother said." "Of course it's not, Ethan," she said in that voice only older relatives have, part scolding, part pleading. "I know things aren't always fair, but do you really think this is the way to handle it?" And there it was. The phrase that makes every adult child of emotional neglect want to scream. Things aren't always fair. As if fairness were the goal. As if we were fighting over the last cookie and not decades of blatant favoritism, gaslighting, and emotional manipulation. "I'm not asking for things to be fair," I said slowly, carefully. "I'm asking for them to stop treating my kids like second-class citizens." There was a pause. "I understand," she said, quieter now. "But your mom is, she's proud, and she feels hurt. She says you embarrassed her." I nearly laughed out loud, a bitter, hollow sound. She felt embarrassed? She tossed paper napkins at my daughters and told them to eat at home, all while serving Melanie's kids catered meals. Then told us they were going to Disneyland without even mentioning it beforehand. If she's embarrassed, maybe she should ask herself why. Brenda sighed heavily. I hate seeing the family fall apart. Then maybe the family shouldn't have built itself around a golden pedestal with Melanie's name on it. We ended the call soon after, politely but coldly. That night, I told Sarah about the conversation. She didn't say anything at first, just shook her head and folded laundry in silence. "Do you think I overreacted?" I asked, seeking reassurance. She looked up, her gaze steady. "No, but I think they'll never see it that way." I nodded, already knowing she was right. And that's when it really started to sink in. This wasn't going to be one of those arguments that blows over. This wasn't a misunderstanding to be cleared up over coffee. This was a fracture, long overdue, and finally split wide open. And like any earthquake, the aftershocks kept coming. A week later, we found out Melanie had posted a Facebook status. Family doesn't always mean blood. Some people just like playing the victim. Upside-down face underneath were a dozen likes from her friends, vague comments like, "I know this feeling too well," and a sea of passive-aggressive validation. My mom commented a heart emoji. Chloe saw it. She was sitting next to me on the couch, flipping through my phone because she was showing me a meme from her school's parent group when the notification popped up. She read it, blinked, and asked, "Is that about us?" I froze, my heart aching. "What do you think?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she handed the phone back and said, "I don't want to go to Grandma's anymore." I nodded, my throat tight. "You don't have to, sweetie." Later that night, Sarah and I sat on the porch after the girls went to bed. It was early fall, just starting to get cold, and we had blankets over our laps like we were an old couple waiting out a storm. "I don't want them growing up like I did," I told her, my voice raw. Walking on eggshells, wondering what version of love they'd get that day. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Then, with quiet resolve, she said, "Then don't let them." That's when I started to plan. Not revenge. Not yet. I wasn't ready for that. But distance. Real distance. No more holidays by default. No more driving an hour just to sit at a table where my daughters were ignored while Melanie's kids opened surprise gift bags. No more passive-aggressive texts. No more guilt trips wrapped in polite language. I started small. First, I pulled out of the group chat. The one where my mom sent daily memes, Melanie shared vacation photos, and no one ever responded when I posted anything about my kids. Ethan has left the conversation. No announcement. Next, I started politely declining invitations. Baby showers, cousin birthdays, cookouts. Everyone came with the same copy-paste excuse. "Sorry, we've got plans that day." Sometimes we didn't, but sometimes peace was the plan. Then I blocked Melanie on social media. Sarah did too. Not out of spite, just preservation. But none of it stopped the next big blow. Because even when you walk away, they find new ways to pull you back in. It came in the form of an envelope, a formal invitation to Melanie's pre-divorce rebirth party. Yes, you read that right. Apparently, she and David were separating. And instead of mourning the end of her marriage, Melanie decided to host a party celebrating her new chapter with a full theme. There was a printed itinerary, a guest list, a dress code, Beyoncé lemonade chic, and a note at the bottom that said, "No kids. This is an adult glow-up celebration. Family support is expected." Attached was a handwritten note from my mom. "It would mean the world if you came to show her some love. She's really hurting. Let's put the past behind us." I read it twice, then slid the envelope across the table to Sarah. She stared at it, blinked slowly, then asked, "Are you being punked?" "I wish," I replied, my voice flat. Chloe, sitting at the counter doing homework, looked over. "What's a rebirth party?" "It's when people throw a party for themselves to pretend everything's fine," Sarah said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I almost smiled. Almost. But something inside me snapped again. Because not only were we being invited to support the same woman who treated my kids like trash, they expected us to forget everything, just like that. Pretend nothing happened. Pretend there wasn't a long list of slights and silences and cruel little choices. But I wasn't pretending anymore. That night I didn't sleep. Not really. I kept thinking of Chloe's face when she saw that Facebook post. Of Lily asking me if she did something wrong when she didn't get a birthday call last year. Of Sarah holding my hand in that restaurant as I finally said all the things I'd swallowed for too long. I stared at the ceiling and made a decision, not just to walk away, but to make it permanent. Not out of anger, but out of love. Because real love doesn't have terms and conditions. It doesn't pick favorites. It doesn't vanish when things get uncomfortable. The next day, I started making quiet moves, small, intentional steps. I took Chloe and Lily to open junior savings accounts under my name. Not that Melanie's kids needed the money, but because I wanted my girls to know they were seen, valued, planned for. I called a therapist, booked a session for myself, then one for Sarah and me, then asked the girls if they'd like to talk to someone, too. We started talking, really talking, around the dinner table about feelings, about family, about how sometimes people who are supposed to love you the most don't know how. And slowly, I started building something my kids had never truly had before. A family without conditions. A home without guilt. But even as I pulled away from the toxicity, something kept tugging at me. Not for reconciliation, but for closure. Because walking away is powerful. But sometimes justice is better. And when I found out what my mom had done with the trust fund my late father left behind, that's when the line between walking away and fighting back disappeared completely. The first time I felt real peace again was on a Sunday afternoon, 6 weeks after we walked out of that restaurant. It was one of those crisp, golden Sundays where the air smells like falling leaves and new beginnings. Chloe and Lily were on the porch carving pumpkins with Sarah, laughing like nothing bad had ever touched them. No tension, no pity, just pure joy. I stood in the doorway with a mug of coffee and realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe in years. We were okay. Better than okay. Actually, we were free. No more waiting for my mom's approval. No more awkward silences after being excluded from family trips. No more shrinking myself to fit into a mold someone else made for me. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't orbiting my family's dysfunction. I was building something separate, and it was working. At first, the progress was quiet, subtle, but unmistakable. Lily had stopped chewing her nails. Chloe started humming again when she did her homework, the way she used to when she was younger, before my mom's favoritism began making her feel small. Sarah began sleeping better, smiling more. She even said to me one night, as we were folding laundry, "I feel like we finally took our house back." That stuck with me because we had. But the real turning point wasn't emotional. It was financial. About 2 months after the dinner, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a lawyer, not mine, my father's. Apparently, after my dad passed 10 years ago, he had set up a small trust fund for his grandkids. It wasn't a fortune, just under $60,000 total, but it was meant to be evenly divided between all of his grandchildren once they turned 18. And my mom, Eleanor, was the trustee. The lawyer had tracked me down because I had never responded to the documentation. Because I never received any, I said flatly. He paused. That's unusual. You're listed on the documents as a contact, along with your sister. He continued, Melanie signed her side 3 years ago. Her daughters have already been granted early disbursements. I felt the words lodge in my throat. Early disbursements. Yes. The trustee, your mother, approved partial early withdrawals for Melanie's children. Roughly $10,000 each for extracurricular enrichment. And nothing for mine. The silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. When I hung up, I didn't even tell Sarah right away. I sat with it for a few hours, not because I didn't trust her, but because I didn't trust myself to speak calmly yet. My father, who died believing both of his children would do right by each other, had left a gift for all of his grandchildren, and my mother had stolen from mine. That night, after the girls went to bed, I told Sarah everything. We sat at the kitchen table in silence for a long time before she said, her voice quiet but firm, "You know what you have to do, right?" I nodded. Yeah, but this wasn't going to be a confrontation. I was done with yelling matches and emotional showdowns. This was going to be surgical. First, I called the lawyer back and asked for everything in writing. The trust documents, the disbursement logs, the signed approvals, the dates. He was professional but incredibly helpful, said it would be in my inbox within the hour. Next, I hired a financial advisor. Not a flashy one, just a quiet, sharp woman named Denise who'd been recommended through a friend. She went through every document, verified every detail, and then, her brow furrowed, she said, "This isn't just ethically wrong. It might be legally actionable." That word stuck in my head. Actionable. For once, I had the leverage. I had the proof. And I had something Melanie and my mother had always underestimated in me. Restraint. While they lived off drama and status, I had spent years observing, studying, biting my tongue. But I wasn't just a silent bystander anymore. In the weeks that followed, I took care of things quietly. Denise helped me set up 2 custodial investment accounts, one for Chloe and one for Lily. I matched the disbursements Melanie's daughters had received out of my own savings. Not because I had to, but because I wanted my girls to know they weren't forgotten, that someone had their back even when others didn't. Then I started documenting everything. Every slight, every exclusion, every passive-aggressive message, every questionable financial decision my mom had made as trustee. I wasn't sure yet what I was going to do with it. But I knew I was going to be ready when the time came. And something strange happened during all this. I started winning. Not just emotionally, professionally too. Maybe it was the clarity. Maybe it was the fact that I wasn't carrying the weight of old wounds anymore. But my performance at work skyrocketed. I landed a new client that doubled my quarterly commission. I was offered a leadership training spot I'd been passed over for last year. For the first time, I felt like I was moving through life on purpose. And then, about 3 months into our break from the family, I got a text. Hey, Thanksgiving dinner at Melanie's this year. Hope you can make it. Girls, too. No apology. No acknowledgement. No olive branch. Just an expectation, like we'd all hit a reset button. I didn't respond. She texted again the next day. Mom, we're doing a gratitude circle. Melanie's making that spinach quiche. Don't be dramatic. Family is all we have. I showed the text to Sarah. She shook her head. She still thinks she's the victim. I know, I said. But I'm not giving her what she wants. What does she want? To pretend nothing happened? To act like this is just another year where we play along? I'm not playing. And we didn't. Thanksgiving came and went. We cooked dinner at home, played board games. Chloe made a centerpiece out of construction paper and glue. Lily set the table with mismatched plates and a paper napkin for every guest, even the dog. It was one of the happiest Thanksgivings I'd had in years. We didn't hear from my mom again until Christmas. This time, she sent Sarah an email. Not me. In it, she wrote, I know Ethan is still upset, but I miss the girls. It's been months. Maybe we can arrange something just for them. I'll take them for ice cream. Bring them presents. No pressure on him to come. Let's not punish the kids over grown-up issues. Sarah showed me the email without a word. Her face was unreadable. Do you want to respond? I asked. She blinked. I don't think I should, because if I do, I might say something I regret. So, I responded. Just one sentence. They're not available to be taught that affection is conditional. She didn't reply. But Melanie did. 2 days later, she tagged Sarah on Instagram. A story post, a photo of her daughters opening presents under a perfect tree, captioned, When you teach your kids the true meaning of family, some of us get it. Some never will. I didn't comment. I didn't react. Because I was already planning something bigger. See, the thing about people like my mom and Melanie is they live for the performance. They need the audience, the praise, the illusion. So, I decided to take away their stage. Not with a public takedown, not with screaming or gossip, but with something far more powerful, truth. That January, I submitted a formal petition to the court requesting a change in trustee management for my father's trust, citing breach of fiduciary duty, unequal disbursement, and lack of communication. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't dramatic. But it was loud in all the ways that mattered. I didn't tell them I was doing it. I let the paperwork speak for me, because by then, I wasn't looking for justice just for my daughters. I was building proof that love isn't shown in grand gestures. It's in consistency, accountability, showing up. And for the first time, I was doing exactly that, not just for my girls, but for me. And just as I was settling into that peace, just when life started to feel steady again, I got a letter. Certified, legal envelope, return address, my mother's lawyer. And when I opened it, I realized she wasn't just refusing to change. She was going to fight. And that's where everything turned again. When that envelope arrived, I thought it might have been confirmation from the court that my trustee petition had been received. I'd been expecting that. But the heavy, cream-colored paper and the sharp, embossed logo on the upper left corner told a different story. This wasn't an acknowledgement. It was a warning shot. Inside was a letter from my mother's attorney, some gray-haired estate lawyer named Richard D. Marks. Very official, very polite, and very clear. Dear Mr. Walker, it began. Our client, Mrs. Eleanor Walker, has received notification of your recent motion to remove her as the trustee of the family trust established by your late father, Thomas Walker. This correspondence is to inform you that Mrs. Walker disputes the characterization of her conduct as negligent or unethical. She has administered the trust in good faith and within the bounds of her legal discretion as trustee. We are prepared to defend against any petition suggesting otherwise. Further, any implication of wrongdoing or mismanagement will be treated as defamatory and responded to accordingly. Should you choose to proceed with legal action, we will seek full recovery of legal expenses from the trust assets. Respectfully, R.D. Marks, ESQ. I reread it 3 times. No apology. No explanation. No acknowledgement that my daughters were entitled to anything. Just legal posturing and a thinly veiled threat. They'd use the trust money to fight me. The money my father left for his grandkids, including mine. Sarah sat across the table, her eyes scanning the letter as I slid it over. She's going to burn the whole thing down before she admits she was wrong, she muttered, a dark premonition in her voice. She thinks I'll back off. Sarah looked at me, her gaze piercing. Are you going to? No, I said. I'm going to dig. And that's when the gears started turning. See, up to that point, I'd been playing defense, pulling back from the family, protecting my kids, documenting the slights. But this was a shift. This was a declaration of war. And I had no intention of sitting quietly while they used my dad's legacy as a weapon against the very people it was meant to protect. I took a week off work, not for stress, but for strategy. I spent the first 2 days reviewing everything Denise, the financial advisor, had helped me compile. Records of the trust fund, statements, deposit logs, and disbursement approvals. The trail of Melanie's withdrawals was crystal clear, for separate educational enrichment checks, all signed by my mom and deposited into Melanie's joint custodial account. But it was the 5th check that caught my attention. Smaller than the others. Only $1,500 listed as travel reimbursement for beneficiary liaison. I highlighted it, a cold not forming in my stomach. What does that mean? I asked Denise. She raised an eyebrow. That's vague. And sketchy. Can you trace where it went? She called me back 2 days later. I couldn't find the end recipient, but I did find the bank. It was deposited into a personal checking account at Kensington Credit Union. That's not Melanie's bank. Nope. It's your mom's. I stared at the speakerphone. So, she reimbursed herself from the trust? That's what it looks like. I hung up and stared at the documents for a long time. Something didn't sit right. So, I started digging deeper. I pulled out old files, found the copy of my father's original will from when he passed. It mentioned the trust by name and included a clause I hadn't noticed before. Funds are to be dispersed for the benefit of each grandchild for purposes of education, medical need, or milestone development. Equal opportunity shall be given to all eligible parties. Equal opportunity. That was the language I needed. If she'd authorized early withdrawals from Melanie's kids under the claim of enrichment and denied the same to mine, she wasn't just morally wrong. She'd violated the legal intent of the trust. But there was more. While flipping through old family folders, I found something else. A list of contacts my father had left behind for legal and financial matters. His old CPA, his life insurance broker, and buried at the bottom, a contact labeled Paul M., Trust Formation Consultant. A quick search led me to a man named Paul Martinez, a now-retired financial consultant living in upstate New York. I called the number. He answered on the second ring. Mr. Martinez, I said, my heart pounding. My name is Ethan Walker. You helped my father set up a family trust about 15 years ago. There was a long pause. Tom Walker from Boston. Yes, I remember him. Kind man, smart, very deliberate. I'm trying to understand the intent behind the trust, I explained. There's been tension. He was silent again, then sighed. What happened? I gave him the short version. He listened, asked a few clarifying questions. Then he said, your father was specific. He didn't want favoritism. He insisted that every grandchild be treated equally, regardless of which parent raised them. I remember those words exactly. I felt something shift in my chest, an old ache wrapped in new anger. Paul continued, he even built a clause into the structure that allows for reassignment of the trustee in the event of partiality. I sat up straighter. It's in the trust? Yes, but it's in the appendix. Most people don't read that far. He offered to send me a scanned copy from his files. I had it in my inbox 2 hours later. Sure enough, there it was. Appendix C, Reassignment clause. If a trustee is found to have distributed more than 60% of funds to less than 50% of eligible beneficiaries, the trust may be reevaluated and reassigned through a legal hearing with only one petitioning party required. The math wasn't even close. Melanie's daughters had received over $20,000. My daughters? Zero. Out of a $60,000 trust, more than 1/3 had gone to one side of the family. And suddenly, I wasn't just in a good position. I was in a powerful one. Because now I had documentation of unequal disbursement. Proof of vague reimbursements deposited into my mother's personal account. A retired trust consultant ready to confirm my father's intentions. A clause that gave me standing for immediate reassignment without needing a majority vote. But even that wasn't the final card. The final card came from an unexpected source. One night around 10 p.m., I got a message on Facebook from a name I barely recognized. Lindsay Pierce, a friend of Melanie's from high school. We hadn't spoken in over a decade. Her message read, "Hey, Ethan. Hope this isn't weird. I know we haven't talked in forever, but I saw your mom at brunch with Melanie a few weeks ago and overheard something I thought you should know." She went on to explain that she'd been seated near them, close enough to hear them talk about Ethan's pity party and how he'll back down once he realizes he's not entitled to anything. But the kicker, Melanie had joked about using the trust money before Ethan even figured out it existed. She said, "I told Mom to funnel the rest through Lily's old dentist if she needed a clean withdrawal. He owes us one." I reread that line 5 times. Lily's dentist. The one she'd stopped seeing 2 years ago after we switched insurance. I went back through the disbursement logs. And there it was, a $2,400 withdrawal labeled dental procedure for LW. I never authorized it, never signed a release. It wasn't my Lily, but it sure looked good on paper. I added it to the evidence folder. Now, I had a trail of false expenses, witness testimony, a clause for reassignment, and a paper trail that reeked of misuse and fraud. I wasn't just on solid ground. I was holding the match and the gasoline. But I didn't light it yet. Not until I could ensure it would burn exactly the way I wanted it to. Not just to reclaim what was ours, but to expose what they tried to hide. Because revenge wasn't just going to be about money anymore. It was about truth. The morning of the court hearing was calm, almost unsettlingly so. It had rained the night before, and the sidewalks were still wet, leaves plastered against the pavement like little mosaics of orange and rust. The courthouse wasn't big, just a low brick building tucked between a library and a park, but stepping through those glass doors felt heavier than it should have. This wasn't just a legal appointment. This was accountability, and it was long overdue. Sarah squeezed my hand before I stepped inside. "You good?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah, I'm good." What I didn't say was that I hadn't slept the night before. Not because I was nervous about losing, but because I'd waited so long for this moment, I didn't quite know what to feel now that it was finally here. The hearing wasn't some dramatic televised trial. It was a small probate courtroom with creaky chairs and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look a little more tired than they probably were. But I wasn't here for the aesthetics. I was here to deliver the truth. Quietly. Precisely. My mother sat across the room from me, dressed in a stiff gray blazer, lips pursed so tightly they looked like they'd been stitched together. Melanie wasn't with her. Apparently, she'd chosen to support from a distance. I imagined her sipping a green smoothie somewhere, convinced this was all just a formality, that I'd lose, that they'd win. And for once, I hoped she stayed confident. I wanted this to surprise them. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, called us to order. "We're here to review petition number 221 GJ regarding the administration of the Walker Family Trust. Petitioner, please proceed." I stood, every document I needed in a neatly organized folder. "Your Honor, thank you. I'm here to request the removal and reassignment of the trustee, Eleanor Walker, on grounds of partial disbursement, financial mismanagement, and breach of fiduciary duty as defined in the original trust document and its Appendix C." Eleanor shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I passed a printed packet to the clerk who handed one to the judge. "Within this file, you'll find the following: a full disbursement record from the past 5 years showing over 60% of trust funds allocated to the children of one beneficiary, my sister, while my own daughters have received nothing. A scanned copy of the trust appendix clause outlining grounds for reassignment based on unequal distribution. 2 early withdrawals labeled for educational enrichment deposited into a joint custodial account managed solely by Melanie Walker. A travel reimbursement deposited directly into the trustee's personal account, Eleanor Walker, without itemized records. A dental procedure bill under my daughter's initials, LW, which I did not authorize. I've included a notarized affidavit from our current dentist confirming that no procedures were performed during that period. The judge's eyebrows lifted at that one, but I wasn't finished. I've also included a written statement from Paul Martinez, the financial consultant who helped draft the original trust, confirming that my father's intent was to provide equal opportunity to all grandchildren, not discretionary favoritism. I sat back down. Eleanor didn't stand right away. Her lawyer, Richard Marks, rose first. We dispute the characterization of my client's actions as malicious or negligent. The trustee operated within her discretion and believed she was acting in the best interest of the trust. The judge held up a hand. Mr. Marks, the math is not in your favor. He tried again. There were unique circumstances. One of the beneficiaries expressed more immediate financial need for educational purposes. She requested it. I interrupted, keeping my tone level. My mother approved it and never once offered the same to my daughters. Eleanor stood then, her face tight with suppressed fury. I didn't think you'd want the money, Ethan. You've always acted like you're too proud for help. And yet, you gave thousands to Melanie's children without asking. Melanie's children had needs. So do mine. The judge tapped her pen against the desk. Mrs. Walker, your role as trustee is not to determine who deserves more. It's to uphold the trust's stated purpose, which is clearly to benefit all grandchildren equally. Eleanor's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she looked genuinely shaken. The judge flipped through the pages for a moment, then looked up. I am granting the petition. Effective immediately, Eleanor Walker is removed as trustee. The court will appoint a neutral fiduciary to oversee remaining disbursements. Furthermore, I am ordering a forensic audit of all transactions related to the trust over the past 5 years to determine if additional legal action is warranted. It was quiet enough to hear the air vent humming. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. But inside, I felt light. Afterward, I walked out into the cold air and took a long, deep breath. Sarah was waiting at the curb. When she saw my face, she already knew. I got in the car, said nothing, just held her hand as we drove. A week later, the fallout started. Melanie texted me first. Ethan, did you really have Mom removed from the trust? This is going to ruin her. You're disgusting. Then she posted a screenshot of a Bible verse to her Instagram story. Something about forgiveness. Then something about betrayal. Then a story of her kids playing in a new backyard inflatable pool with the caption, "We rise anyway." I didn't respond because I didn't need to. The court-appointed trustee reached out 2 days later to confirm that pending disbursements would be frozen until the audit concluded. Sarah and I sat down with the girls and explained what happened carefully. We didn't use words like stolen or corrupt. We told them that their grandpa had left something behind for them, and now it would finally be shared fairly. Chloe asked, "Did Grandma know that before?" I nodded. She thought for a second, then said, "Then I don't want her presence anymore." Lily added, "Me neither, but can we still do ice cream?" We laughed, said yes. And just like that chapter closed, but something else opened. Something better. A few weeks later, I got a check in the mail, not from the trust, but from a client I'd helped months earlier who had closed a major deal. Attached was a note, "Ethan, your clarity and honesty changed how we approached everything. I know you didn't ask for anything in return, but I wanted you to know how much that meant. Please use this however you'd like, for your family, for their future." It was for $12,000. I used it to start 2 Roth IRAs for Chloe and Lily. Put the rest toward a vacation, our first real one in years. We didn't go to Disneyland. We went to a cabin in the Smoky Mountains. Spent the days hiking, laughing, playing card games by the fire. And not once did I think about my mom. Because the thing about revenge is it doesn't always have to look like fire and fury. Sometimes it looks like peace. Sounds like laughter. It feels like standing in the middle of your life and realizing you don't owe anyone your silence anymore. And I wasn't done, because there was still one more card I hadn't played. The one that would finally expose exactly who Eleanor Walker really was. And once I played it, she'd never be able to hide behind family again. The final card I held wasn't forged in court or bank statements. It was truth, plain, unvarnished, and brutal. And it came from a place my mother had never expected, her own past. A few weeks after the court removed her as trustee, the audit began. It was out of my hands by then, managed by a neutral fiduciary, just like the judge ordered. But I'd submitted everything I had, copies of shady transactions, the misappropriated dental payment, the travel reimbursement, and, of course, the statement from Paul Martinez, the trust consultant. I thought that would be the end of it, until Paul called me again. I was going through some of the old records, he said, and I found something I think you should see. Your father left a letter. It wasn't meant to be opened unless there was a dispute over the trust. A letter? I asked, my heart thudding. Yeah. It was addressed to the trustee, Eleanor, but with a note that said, open only if the kids fight. I figured given recent events, well, you have a right to see it now. He sent it by express mail. It arrived 2 days later, sealed in a plain envelope with my father's unmistakable handwriting across the front, to Eleanor. If you're reading this, something went wrong, and I'm not surprised. That's how it began. The rest of the letter was a gut punch. Not angry, not cruel, just devastatingly honest. He went on to explain how he feared favoritism would tear the family apart. How he'd seen it forming even before he got sick. How Melanie's constant demands and Eleanor's blind indulgence made him worry for my future relationship with her and with my children. How he'd set up the trust to be fair on purpose, because he feared that when he was gone, fairness would die with him. He ended it with this. If you cannot bring yourself to treat Ethan's children the way you treat Melanie's, if you cannot offer them the same time, attention, and generosity, then step aside. Let someone else do what you cannot. Do not dishonor their names. Do not dishonor mine. That was the nail in the coffin. I forwarded the letter to the fiduciary auditor, who immediately added it to the case file. Within a month, the audit report came back with findings of misuse of funds, unequal distribution, and ethical misconduct. It was worse than I thought. Eleanor had authorized over $28,000 in disbursements to Melanie's daughters, while not a single dollar had been allocated to Chloe or Lily. Not only that, she'd claimed another $3,800 in trustee expenses for spa visits, travel, meals, and consulting calls with Melanie, none of which were documented. The new trustee filed a civil complaint for restitution. Eleanor would either return the misused funds to the trust or face a lawsuit. She chose silence for weeks, until eventually, she cracked. It started with an email from Eleanor Walker. Subject, I hope you're happy. You've destroyed this family. Congratulations. The email was a toxic cocktail of victimhood and thinly veiled rage. I don't know who you've become, Ethan, but it's not someone I recognize. Your father would be ashamed of what you've done to your own mother. I only ever wanted to help. I never meant to hurt anyone. I just thought Melanie needed more support. She's had such a hard time. I didn't think you'd make it a public spectacle. I can't show my face at church anymore. Everyone is asking questions. Your Aunt Brenda won't return my calls. Even the pastor asked if I was okay. Do you know how humiliating this is? I never thought you'd do this to me. Don't bother responding. I wouldn't believe anything you said anyway. I didn't respond because for once, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. She wanted me to feel guilt, to feel like I'd burned the house down. But all I'd done was turn on the lights, and now the house was finally showing its cracks. Then came the ripple effects. Melanie, suddenly very aware that public scrutiny was closing in, deactivated her Instagram for 3 weeks. When she came back, her profile was private and scrubbed of any references to family. Gone were the inspirational quotes. Gone were the soft focus photos of her daughters playing piano with captions like Legacy and Light. I heard through a mutual cousin that she tried to open a new savings account for one of her girls and was flagged by the bank for custodial complications. Apparently, once the new trustee was in charge, all the enrichment accounts Melanie had used were shut down and the money was recalled. She had to pay back nearly $11,000. Melanie sent Sarah a text that simply said, "Was it worth it? You've turned Ethan into someone I don't even recognize." Sarah didn't respond either. Not because she didn't want to, but because we were on a plane headed to Colorado for a week-long winter trip. The girls' first time seeing snow. We'd saved up for it after the audit closed and the trust officially allocated new, equal distributions. Each child, Chloe, Lily, Ava, and Charlotte received the same amount, but Melanie had to apply for hers now through a formal process. No more under-the-table reimbursements. No more quiet favoritism. We used our funds the way we knew my dad would have wanted, to make memories, to build something lasting. And on the final night of the trip, with snow falling outside the cabin window, Lily asked, "Do you think Grandpa would have liked this?" I smiled. "He would have loved it, sweetie." Chloe curled up beside me. "I think he'd be proud of you, Dad." Sarah kissed my shoulder. "I know he would." Months passed. We never returned to normal. There were no forced reunions, no performative apologies, just a new silence from my mom's side of the family. A silence we learned to live with, then appreciate. The girls stopped asking about birthdays and holidays with Grandma. We stopped checking if Melanie had posted anything passive-aggressive online. And I stopped wondering if I'd done the right thing, because I knew. Not just from the court ruling, not just from the money, but from the calm that settled into our home. The ease with which my daughters now existed in their own skin. The laughter that came back, loud, free, unapologetic. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were thriving. And the best revenge? It wasn't the court win. It wasn't the money clawed back. It was watching my daughters grow up knowing, without question, that they were loved unconditionally. That they didn't need to earn their worth. That no one could decide they were less important, less valuable, less deserving, and get away with it. That's what we built. And we built it out of the ashes they left behind. So, if you're wondering whether speaking up is worth the fallout, whether choosing truth over comfort is too messy, whether walking away from toxic family will leave you with nothing, let me tell you this. I walked through fire to get here, and I came out stronger, clearer, and free. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to choose between family peace and your own children's well-being? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know.